Before I introduce our speaker tonight, I just want to remind everyone to please turn your cell phones or devices or smartwatches or 1980s pagers to silent so that we can give our full attention to Dr. Jeff Wilson. Dr. Wilson is somebody who I've known in one way or another as long as I've been a scholar, I think. But the first time that I'm going to go a little off script, there are some programs that have his official biography, if you'd like to pick those up on the outside. But the first time I remember meeting Jeff was actually at a conference here at the Institute of Buddhist Studies in 2010, I think it was. When he... Was that the Buddha? No, that was your Beyond Borders. The Buddhism Beyond Borders conference, which was... a transformative moment in my professional career because it was the first time that me and my colleague, Natalie Cooley, organized a conference and we realized that was a really bad idea. Conferences are a lot of work, but it was a wonderful conference and it was a wonderful time to meet a lot of amazing scholars, including Dr. Jeff Wilson, who since then has gone on to write at least 1,000 books, I believe, on the subjects of Jodo Shinshu Buddhism, as well as mindfulness and various other things. And one of the things I've often appreciated about Jeff's work is that he's very attentive to the lived experience of Jodo Shinshu in the United States. And I'm very much looking forward to him presenting his lecture today, which I know is based on new research that he's been doing on the subject of engaged Buddhism from a Jodo Shinshu perspective. And so without further ado, I'm just going to turn it over to Dr. Wilson. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Am I being picked up well on the audio? Everybody can hear me in here? Well, okay, excellent. Okay, I didn't even do anything. It seems to be on. Yeah, I just want to make sure it's picking up. Sorry, we've got lots of wires. We got this thing. We were working, Takashi Sensei and I, for a while this morning, tried to get it right. And in the end, we couldn't get this to show the presentation and go on Zoom and all that all at the same time. So our workaround was put it up on here, point the Zoom camera at it, and then so that's why it's in this funny configuration here. But I'm told we have a lot of people joining us online, so I'm glad that they'll at least be able to be with us virtually and see what's going on. Please excuse the wires. This is because I couldn't get all the tech really to work. Anyways, thank you everyone for being here this afternoon. Thank you to everyone online. Thank you especially to Mark and your family. Yeah, this is going to be new research. So I've been working on this research project since January 6, 2021. There might be some significance to that date. It has not been debuted, except that I gave a sort of a preparatory lecture at the American Academy of Religion conference year before last, where I talked about Pure Land erasure from sort of the history of the Buddhist Peace Fellowship and of engaged Buddhism and so on. But that was mainly about the ways in which things are left out. Today I'm going to be talking about some of the stuff people have actually done. So this is almost entirely new. The first anecdote about Reverend Tatsuo Minato, I did debut that at the Decolonizing Buddhist Studies Conference at University of Toronto in January, but otherwise this is entirely fresh. So if you hate it, you get to be my first focus group. To let me know that I have wasted the last 5+ years. That would be interesting to know. I'll take it under advisement and ignore you because of book contracts. So, good afternoon, everyone. These are my official remarks here, okay? I'm honored to be here with you for the Taiketsu Unno Memorial Lecture. Is that the actual name of the series? Okay, just wanted to make sure. Okay, thank you. Today, my talk is entitled All Power to the Sangha, Stories of Engaged Jodo Shinshu Buddhists in North America and Hawaii. These stories come from my current research project, which is a series of books on Jodo Shinshu social engagement. The first, titled All Power to the Sangha, is nearly complete. This one looks at how Pure Land Buddhists have been left out of the story of engaged Buddhism. It explores their actual contributions to the Buddhist Peace Fellowship and other organizations. It analyzes the reasons for Jodo Shinshu engagement, and it presents the story of Jodo Shinshu and the Asian American movement, such as programs like Relevant American Buddhists, which I'm going to discuss a bit here today. The second volume in this upcoming series provides a complete history of American and Canadian Jodo Shinshu and LGBTQ plus issues, from the first discussion of gay matters in the deeply heteronormative mainland and Hawaiian Sanghas of the 1960s, up to the transformation into more overtly affirming and welcoming congregations today. That is, of course, an ongoing journey. That second book, that is also nearly complete. And the third book that I'm working on examines many individual topics in North American and Hawaiian Jodo Shinshu history, including prison ministry, abortion, environmentalism, and separation of church and state. I'm about 40% done with that third volume. So why 3 whole books on one topic? Especially because I already have tenure. So like, why am I even, doing this much work? Well, the discipline of Buddhist studies in North America, it's heavily dominated by scholars who are personally associated with meditation-oriented forms of Buddhism. So normative elite ideas about Buddhist practice have tended to marginalize Pure Land Buddhism, despite it being substantially larger than such traditions as Tibetan Buddhism or Zen Buddhism. This tendency is especially strong in the subfield of engaged Buddhist studies. Indeed, I think that a North American student trained in the English language research on engaged Buddhism could be excused for not even knowing that Pure Land Buddhism exists. There are, of course, exceptions. The Institute of Buddhist Studies offers a course on engaged Buddhism that does include Shin Buddhist material. But on the whole, the exclusion of Pure Land material is nearly universal. And indeed, the farther away we move from Berkeley, it just drops precipitously how much exposure you could have to that sort of material. However, as a longtime participant in Jodo Shinshu, I'm personally aware of many engaged Shin Buddhists. For my current research project, I've been collecting oral history, archival treasures, and contemporary work by Jodo Shinshu Buddhists involving a wide range of social causes. Today, I want to debut some of the stories from that research with you. Given the challenging state of things in the USA today, I think there's value in discovering how generations of Pure Land Buddhists have worked to spread compassion in troubling times. So, to do so, I want to draw on a number of examples taken out of this research, the first of which is going to be Reverend Tatsuo Manetto. Today at age 85, Reverend Manetto is one of the most senior Buddhist clergymen in Hawaii. But I would actually like us to meet him here today at a younger age in 1972. At the time, he was in his early 30s, not yet a naturalized American citizen, and he became caught between conflicting forces over the war in Vietnam. Reverend Manetto was serving at the Honolulu Betsuin, Oahu's oldest and largest temple. Did that advance? Okay, good, the tech is working. I can't actually see the screen. Meanwhile, every day, KC-135 Stratotakers were taking off from nearby Hickam Air Force Base in order to refuel B-52s that were conducting illegal American bombing campaigns in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. These bombing runs weighed heavily on Reverend Manetto's mind. Not only were they killing hundreds of thousands of people, they surely evoked his own experience with American bombs. Tatsuo Manetto was 5 years old when the United States dropped the first atomic bomb on his home in Hiroshima. The blast knocked a temple down on top of his mother and grandmother. They managed to claw their way out of the rubble and discovered his aunt stumbling down the road, half of her body covered in burns. The bomb's devastation left the survivors without proper food, clothes, and shelter. Manetto suffered from the aftermath through years of hardship and loss. By 1972, many Asian Americans had come to see the American war in Southeast Asia as part of a larger, centuries-long pattern of European and American imperialism, colonialism, and exploitation of Asia. In Honolulu, Reverend Manetto gathered together several Buddhist lay people, including Dr. Al Bloom, a professor of Buddhist studies who specialized in the teachings of Shinran, the 13th century founder of Jodo Shinshu. Together with this collection of people, they formed the Ad Hoc Committee of Concerned Buddhists, which was the first American Buddhist group organized specifically as a response to the Vietnam War. The committee studied the situation in Southeast Asia and the United States. They were disturbed by the horrendous death toll of the American bombs and the persecution of Vietnamese Buddhists. And they noted how Vietnamese Buddhist leaders trapped between the communist and capitalist forces rejected the war entirely. They decided to present their views by leafleting Hickam Air Force Base in commemoration of Gotane, the birthday observance of Shindan. With the committee's support, Romanetto drafted a pamphlet on Buddhism and war. As the day for their leafletting approached, news leaked out to the press, and both major Honolulu newspapers published stories about the upcoming Buddhist activism. In response, Romanetto was called to the house of Bishop Kanmo Imamura and his wife Jane. Gathered there were various members of the Kyodan's Board of Governors, who demanded that Manetto explain himself. They pressured him to call off the action, fearful that it might imperil the immigration status of the many Buddhist ministers from Japan, or even endanger the Temple Network's nonprofit status. Mrs. Imamura was also strongly opposed to the leafletting, as large numbers of Honganji members were employed at the base. Unsure of how to proceed, Reverend Manetto sought guidance in the Tanisho, a short collection of Shindan's teachings. As he read Tanisho chapter 4, he found his answer. This is what Shindan said. Concerning compassion, there is a difference between the path of sages and the Pure Land path. So I'll pause here to note that the path of sages, this is a Pure Land term for non-Pure Land Buddhisms, which are based on cultivating personal perfections and rising above the level of ordinary people in Shinran's understanding. So Shinran is making a distinction between elite Buddhism, which he trained in for 20 years, and his newer Pure Land approach, which was meant for the masses of regular folks. So here's how he continues in Tanisho chapter 4. Compassion in the path of sages is to pity, commiserate with, and care for beings. It's extremely difficult, however, to accomplish the saving of others just as one wishes. Compassion in the Pure Land path should be understood as first attaining Buddhahood quickly through saying the Nimbutsu, and with the mind of great love and great compassion, freely benefiting sentient beings as one wishes. However much love and pity we may feel in our present lives, it's hard to save others as we wish. Hence, such compassion remains unfulfilled. Only through saying the Nimbutsu can perfect compassion be expressed. So, as Reverend Manetto read the passage, his doubts were resolved. He realized there were two kinds of Buddhist compassion: the compassion of those who rise above and feel pity for regular people, and the compassion of the Pure Land, where one is liberated along with all other suffering beings and expresses their care out of a sense of oneness, not pity. Furthermore, he took to heart Shinran's words that however much we may wish to help others, our compassion is limited and its effects are imperfect. Only the Nimbutsu, which is the sound of Amida's boundless light, embracing everyone in their suffering, can fully express perfect compassion. Illuminated by the light of the Buddha, knowing that his own efforts would not stop the war and would cause upset to some people in his Sangha, and realizing that nonetheless, expressing his concern and compassion over the suffering in Southeast Asia was a vehicle for great compassion to manifest in the world. Manetto's heart was settled. Together with the other committee members, he proceeded to carry out the leafletting at the airbase. To further illustrate Reverend Manetto's thinking, I'll quote from the pamphlet that the ad hoc committee handed out. So this is from that pamphlet, Buddhism and War. The essence of the teaching of Buddha is compassion and wisdom, the universal oneness of mankind, and the respect for the worth and dignity of all human beings, whatever nation, culture, race, or social status. In consequence of the compassion of Buddha, hatred and war are inalterably opposed to the spirit of Buddhism. We, as concerned Buddhists and students of Buddhism, through this pamphlet are expressing our belief that the Vietnam War opposes the spirit of Buddha and endangers the welfare of all mankind. Pure Land Buddhists of Hawaii deplore with deep sorrow and agony the ongoing destruction of Buddhist civilizations by American automated air war. When will it be that nearly 10 million landless and penniless refugees return to their ancestral villages and live in peace again? When will it be that all Americans can say that war is evil and that it should be stopped right now? In consequence of Amida Buddha's compassionate concern about the peace of the world, all of the Pure Land Buddhists who aspire to be born in the Pure Land will share all the sufferings in Indochina, will never be at peace until the war comes to an end, and will work in their own ways to end the wars in Indochina. So here at the end of the statement, Reverend Manetto is pointing towards a further aspect of his stance against the war. And thinking about how to approach the suffering engendered by the Vietnam War, one primary source that he draws upon is the traditional 48 vows of the larger Pure Land Sutra. However, he also goes further to make a radical statement with no precedent in Buddhist history. He proclaims Amida Buddha's 49th vow. As he put it, the 49th vow of Dharmakara Bodhisattva is, quote, "If the Vietnam War does not come to an end, I will not attain enlightenment." Thus, Reverend Manetto expresses his awareness of the deep compassion of the Buddha that is embracing the suffering of all of the people of Southeast Asia, staking his own liberation on the insistence that the hell of the Vietnam War must come to an end. This proclamation of the 49th vow is traditional in the sense that it emerges directly from the vows recorded in the larger Pure Land Sutra, and it is also revolutionary in that it adds a new vow never before enunciated in the Pure Land tradition. By doing so, the 49th vow becomes the vehicle for extending the primal power of the vows into the present day. No longer a set of 48 goals achieved in the ancient past, the 49th vow reveals that the Pure Land is continuously coming into being, as Amida Buddha dynamically responds to and encompasses contemporary forms of suffering. By proclaiming Amida Buddha's 49th vow in response to his concerns over the Vietnam War, Reverend Manetto makes the Buddha's vows his own vow. This builds on Shinran's teaching that in the process of liberation, Amida Buddha's heart becomes our own heart, purifying the selfish, ignorant tendencies in our minds. Thus, once we have received the Buddha's heart, we become vehicles for the expression of ultimate compassion. This is what Reverend Manetto discovered in Chapter 4 of the Tanisho, as he realized that saying the Nimbutsu and expressing his agony over the suffering of the Vietnamese, the Laotians, and the Cambodians was part of the process of manifesting the Buddha's vow in the midst of our imperfect world. So there's a lot more that can be said about Reverend Manetto's engagement with social issues as a Shin Buddhist minister, but I want to move on to another example, one that's closer to us here in Berkeley. Today, the concept of Asian American is universally understood across the United States, and it's a term of self-identity used by millions of Americans. But that term was born less than 60 years ago, when the Asian American Political Alliance was formed with chapters at UC Berkeley and San Francisco State. APA, Asian American Political Alliance, came together to push for reforms at Bay Area universities that would address anti-Asian racism and exclusion. Agitating for more representation in the curriculum, APA successfully fought for and achieved the world's first course in Asian American history, Asian Studies 100X, the Evolution of Asians in America, held at Berkeley during the winter 1969 term. This was the first Asian American Studies course. Not just here, I mean, in human history. One of the teaching assistants for that course was Ron Miyamura from the small farming community of Pinrin in the Central Valley. A member of the Placer Buddhist Church, Miyamura had studied at UC Davis, where he started a campus Young Buddhist Association, then came to Berkeley to attend the Institute of Buddhist Studies. Miyamura was also the acting president of APA. Along with several friends, Miyamura organized a symposium at Berkeley in January 1969 called Yellow Identity, which became a turning point in the university's history and that of the nation. The Yellow Identity Symposium focused on Asian American identity and history, Asian student movements, and the Third World Liberation Strike that was taking place in San Francisco. Speakers included UC Davis Professor Isao Fujimoto of the Yakima Buddhist Church. Miyamura thought that the Yellow Identity Symposium might attract 300 attendees. Closer to 1,000 showed up, which provided major momentum to the nascent movement for Asian American identity and empowerment. The attendees voted to support the Third World Liberation Strike and to call for similar reforms at UC Berkeley. One moment. Various other APA members were also from Jodo Shinshu temple backgrounds, such as Patty Hirota, Chizumaniwa, Kathy Higashioka, and Shoshana Arai. Not long after the Yellow Identity Symposium, Miyamura called a special meeting of the Asian American Political Alliance, which was held at the Institute of Buddhist Studies. Here are declassified files from the FBI, which was spying on Miyamura and the others in order to defeat the movement for minority self-determination in America. At the IBS meeting, APA decided to support a major student strike at UC Berkeley and coordinated with the African American Student Union, the Mexican American Student Union, and Native American Student Union to form a local Third World Liberation Front. Miyamura was appointed as APA's official coordinator of the strike. APA and their partners organized picket lines, issued flyers and press releases, lobbied campus unions to join their cause, and held additional meetings. University administrators pushed back at the strike, targeting students for retribution. Campus security and Alameda County police attacked the picket lines and sit-ins repeatedly, resulting in many arrests and injuries. Governor Ronald Reagan declared a state of emergency and sent in the California Highway Patrol to disrupt the strikers. The strikers held firm all through February, prompting Reagan to activate the National Guard, which strafed the strikers with tear gas from helicopters and invaded the campus en masse, making all university activities impossible. Over 2,000 National Guardsmen, Highway Patrol officers, and local police were organized to try and put down the strike, in what was the largest police action in Berkeley history. And if you know something about Berkeley history, that's saying something. So, in March 1969, the UC Berkeley Academic Senate voted for the creation of a Department of Ethnic Studies. In response, Miyamura gathered APA at the Institute of Buddhist Studies once more, where they discussed the matter and agreed to declare victory. Miyamura called the African American Student Union, where similar discussions were taking place, and the strike was called off. The strike had achieved tangible successes, and the world's first ever Department of Ethnic Studies came into effect at UC Berkeley in fall 1969. As BCA youth and young adults took part in various strikes, protests, and issues, the Asian American movement and other liberation movements of the time were increasingly inspiring them to seek greater self-determination, identity, and relevance for themselves within the Buddhist churches of America. This often manifested as workshops and teach-ins held at Western and National Young Buddhist Association events, which educated young Buddhists on the Vietnam War, Asian American identity, and other topics. One of these conferences produced a resolution supporting the Great Boycott of the United Farm Workers. That angered Central Valley farm owners on the BCA board. And at a 1971 board meeting, they took NYBA President Ken Tanaka to the woodshed over this, so to speak. Tanaka responded by working with Ron Kobata, who himself was active in the Asian American movement, and he was the NYBA rep to the board, and the two of them drafted a proposal/demand to create a self-governed youth revitalization program called Relevant American Buddhists. The BCA National Council passed the resolution with funding in early 1972. Ron Miyamura became the RAB, Relevant American Buddhist, coordinator for the Eastern District, while other young coordinators included Marvin Harada and Brian Nagata, among many other people whose names would be very familiar to current Jodo Shinshu people. For approximately a decade, RAB coordinators organized retreats and workshops, fostered new forms of Sansei Buddhist identity, and connected young Shin Buddhists with one another locally and across the continent. Now, I want to shift from that to talking about the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, another thing with a strong presence in the Berkeley area. In 1979, Ron Miyamura became one of 3 Jodo Shinshu co-founders of the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, along with Hiroshi Suzuki of Waimea Higashi Honganji in Hawaii, and Al Bloom, who would later become Dean of the Institute of Buddhist Studies. Miyamura and Suzuki were the only 2 non-white original members of the BPF. Thus, they played an important role. But in speaking of the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, there's one BCA figure that especially deserves to be focused on. That's Reverend Ryo Imamura. Imamura had grown up in Berkeley, where the Institute of Buddhist Studies started as a study group in his childhood living room. He later went to Kyoto, studying for the ministry alongside Ron Miyamura and other Americans of their generation. When he returned to Hawaii, where he'd lived since his father Kanmo Imamura became bishop, he was instrumental in starting the Buddhist Study Center and making it a hub for young Jodo Shinshu Buddhists. He cut a striking and controversial figure, wearing tie-dyed robes when conducting services at the Honolulu bedside. For real, playing the guitar at Vietnam War protests, and using the BSC's newsletter Metta as a muckraking periodical to spear what he perceived as corruption, waste, and outdated practices in the state Kyoto. Imamura subsequently moved to the Bay Area, where he became a minister at the Buddhist Temple of Alameda. Concerned about the plight of Cambodian refugees fleeing the violence of the Khmer Rouge, in 1979, Imamura successfully convinced the BCA to restart their Social Welfare Committee, with himself as the chair. Under his leadership, the committee donated over $30,000 to refugee relief, as well as material goods, and Imamura played a major role in helping with refugee paperwork and communicating the need for Buddhist spiritual support to the U.S. authorities. During the same time, Imamura joined the Buddhist Peace Fellowship. So this is basically in the second year of the Peace Fellowship's existence, thereby becoming the third Asian American member. In 1983, he was elected to the BPF board, along with Joanna Macy and Gary Snyder, providing its first non-white leadership. His impact was immediately felt. Imamura convinced the BCA Ministers Association to pass a resolution calling for membership in the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, which was also adopted by the BCA's National Board. Imamura ran the resolution in the Wheel of Dharma and published the BPF membership form. A strong spike of Jodo Shinshu members joined the BPF, reaching perhaps 15% of the organization's total early membership. In January 1984, Imamura was elected the second president of the Buddhist Peace Fellowship, replacing founder Robert Aitken. During his time as president, Imamura used his organizational skills as a temple minister and former Buddhist Study Center director to professionalize the BPF's procedures. He moved the board to meet in person. They'd been doing conference calls up until that time. He greatly increased the number of dues payers among the BPF membership, and he oversaw the completion of the conversion of the Buddhist Peace Fellowship newsletter, which he was a co-editor of, into a larger, high-quality quarterly publication that would become the flag bearer for the American Engaged Buddhist community. Imamura also worked to develop deeper ties between BPF members and the Fellowship of Reconciliation. As he reported when he attended the FOR, the Fellowship of Reconciliation Conference, in Santa Clarita, quote, "They were so happy to get their first glimpse of a Buddhist Peace Fellowship member that I became an instant celebrity. Our literature became sought-after souvenirs, and everyone wanted to know what Buddhists thought about everything. Some even wanted to know if we had any Caucasian members in BPF. If they only knew." End quote. In December 1984, Imamura went to Tokyo as the BPF's representative to the Second International Symposium on Buddhism and Leadership for Peace, where he delivered a paper on American Buddhism and peace work. Imamura continued to be part of the Bay Area BPF chapter, reporting to the board that a new Buddhist action group for Central America was operating as a way of organizing against the war started by the CIA-backed Contra forces in Nicaragua and the resulting refugee situation because of that war. As president, he undertook to meet with the heads of various BPF chapters, and he helped bring in leaders of various Asian American Buddhist groups in the Los Angeles area to start an LA Buddhist Peace Fellowship chapter, the first one with majority Asian American membership. He also met with the Dalai Lama in his role as Buddhist Peace Fellowship president and asked him to join the BPF's Board of International Advisors. Meanwhile, Imamura had convinced the BCA to institute a Social Issues Committee. With himself as the chair, he gathered a powerhouse lineup of members. Amy Okano was the vice chair, Ron Nakano was the secretary, and Reverend Laverne Sasaki, Reverend Ken Yamaguchi, Yoshi Taya, Amy Imai, Calvin Steinmetz, David Matsumoto, and Alan Hikoyeda were regular members, while Bishop Segan Yamaoka, former Bishop Kinryo Tsuji, Bante Silo Wimala, and Mikio Uchiyama served as ex officio members. This included many major players in the BCA and a noticeable degree of gender, race, clergy, lay, generational, and even sectarian diversity. The committee decided to tackle one issue at a time in a process of extensive research, discussion, and discernment. Issues nominated by members for attention were abortion and reproductive rights, prayer in schools, Buddhists taking political action, nuclear disarmament, redress for the World War II internment, euthanasia, capital punishment, the year of the Bible, that was a thing in the 80s, nuclear power, women's rights, environmental concerns, and draft registration. So they had an ambitious slate. Out of this, the committee voted to make abortion rights their first topic. The research and discussion on the topic were extensive. The committee brought in experts from both sides of the debate to present their views, and individual members carried out research and reported back their findings over 7 separate meetings. Once a preliminary report was prepared, it was shared with all the active members of the Buddhist Churches of America. Feedback was received and incorporated into additional rounds of editing, and then a final draft was submitted to the BCA National Council for review and approval. Accepted in February 1984, this was one of the most comprehensively consultative stances ever taken by the BCA and represented the first official statement on abortion by an American Buddhist organization. It was published as a pamphlet, a Shin Buddhist stance on abortion, that was distributed and displayed at temples across the United States. The pamphlet proved popular and was reprinted multiple times. It also attracted significant attention in both Buddhist and mainstream circles, and it has been cited many times as the sole Buddhist evidence in state and federal Supreme Court suits over access to abortion. The actual position taken by the BCA was nuanced and appeared to chart a middle path between the most extreme pro-life and pro-choice sides in this political debate. And it mirrored closely a position that Imamura had first declared in a meta-editorial nearly a decade earlier in Hawaii. It began by noting that, quote, since Buddhism as a religious system is human-centered without dependency on God or gods, moral or ethical questions involve individual subjectivities and require a meeting of a sense of responsibility and of enlightened self-interest, end quote. On the one hand, this meant that heterosexual relations should be undertaken with a sense of awareness for the possible consequences of sex. On the other hand, the stance immediately noted, contraception sometimes fails, and those caught in the moment of passion may act negligently. Thus, the question of abortion was a necessary issue to consider. From an abstract, moralistic standpoint, they held that abortion is the wrong choice. Quote, within the life of Nimbutsu, the truth seeker cannot help but feel compassion for all forms of life. Realizing that all sentient beings have Buddha nature and are embraced in oneness within the great compassion of Amida Buddha, he holds all forms of life in the deepest reverence, as he hears the truth seeker. Human life is especially precious because there's only the human being who can realize Shinji. Therefore, abortion, the taking of human life, is fundamentally wrong and must be rejected by Buddhists, end quote. Casual readers may have taken this for a clear pro-life statement, but advocates for the recriminalization of abortion would have been disappointed in the further conclusions of the BCA, whose fundamental Jodo Shinshu sense of solidarity with suffering people in an imperfect world led them in a different direction. Quote, however, the great compassion recognizes the complexity of samsaric life and the inability of unenlightened beings to live a truly ethical life, no matter how much they might want to. How can one even live one day without necessitating the taking of life? End quote. The stance then recounted the many ways we all cause harm, from our bodies eliminating parasites to eating meat, wearing leather, employing pesticides, and our, quote, personal responsibility for the countless human deaths resulting from military conflicts, mass starvation, and disasters, end quote, that we are unavoidably entangled with. Quote, it is truly lamentable to Buddhists that living itself requires the taking of many lives. the BCA reflected. The situation, therefore, was more complex than a simple condemnation of abortion would admit. While the fetus was a living being worthy of acknowledgement, its existence did not override the needs of the mother herself. Quote, "The woman carrying the fetus may sincerely feel that her physical and or psychological conditions requires the abortion of the fetus. Her pregnancy may be the result of sexual assault or might be life-threatening to her. Perhaps she knows that the baby, if allowed to be born, will be seriously deformed or disabled. Or she might be convinced that the baby will be born into an unwelcome environment. Who can pass judgment of the morality in such a situation?" End quote. Well, not the BCA, apparently. In the end, they took a position of unambiguous support for legal abortion rights. Quote, "Although others may be involved in the decision-making, it is the woman carrying the fetus and no one else who must in the end make this most difficult decision and live with it for the rest of her life. As Buddhists, we can only encourage her to make a decision that's both thoughtful and compassionate." End quote. Thus, the BCA voided any support for legal prescriptions against abortion, taking the position that it was a personal matter for the pregnant woman to decide for herself. Now, I want to move to another important form of Jodo Shinshu social engagement that was taking place during this era. This was prison ministry. The first American Buddhist prison ministry was carried out by Reverend Ernest Hunt in Hawaii during the 1920s. Hunt was ordained by Reverend Imyo Imamura and employed by the Hompa Honganji Mission of Hawaii to conduct English language Buddhist ministry. After he left that position, the next major American Buddhist prison ministry was carried out by Reverend Hogan Fujimoto of the BCA National Headquarters. He began with classes at the California Correctional Training Facility in Soledad, then held a regular class on Buddhism at San Quentin State Prison for 3 years, and eventually served several additional California prisons while carrying out a robust correspondence with Buddhists incarcerated across the United States. Reverend Fujimoto was a very significant figure in the 20th century BCA. He held multiple administrative positions, especially in education roles, and he served several temples. He was an important fighter in the pushback against creationism, school prayer, and other violations of church and state. And he was the first BCA leader to speak publicly and positively about gay rights in the 1970s. We can get a sense of the impact he had on incarcerated people through looking at his correspondence. Here's one example, which I'll quote from. JG was a prisoner in 1971 who wrote to Reverend Fujimoto saying, quote, "I came here 8.5 years ago on a murder conviction with a past record of murder in another state and had just put 38 bullets in my mouth. That's about as low in spirit as I feel a man should sink. As I remained alive, it seemed to be for a reason and that I must turn in a different direction. But where could I turn? I couldn't accept any of the Western Church's beliefs. I've just finished Shinran and Jodo Shinshu, these are names of books, and have borrowed the Triple Sutra of Shin Buddhism and the Shinshu Seiten from the same person. I feel that I've found myself and something I can believe in, namely Amida and the Nembutsu. I wanted to speak of the influence you and the Buddhist church has in even a secluded place such as this prison. I have been a very evil man, and I am still such. Yet I can't think of doing those things again. I now have faith, and that faith is in Namandabu, and my wish is to continue my travel on the right path. I think the ship of compassion is correct. Any guidance that you find time to give me will be welcome." Reverend Fujimoto replied to this letter, "Welcome aboard the ship of compassion called Amida. There's always room for another. All we have to do is juggle ourselves a bit, and you'll find plenty of room. Namo Amida Butsu is the password. Amida's compassion is a vast thing. It embraces the whole of the universe, extending well beyond the bounds of human intellect. So vast, and yet so tender and compassionate, because it extends even into the hearts of you and insignificant me." End quote. Perhaps the most important inmate that Fujimoto counseled was Fred Cruz, a Mexican-American man imprisoned in Texas. Starting in 1967, Fujimoto and Cruz maintained an active correspondence, and Cruz became a devout devotee of Jodo Shinshu Buddhism. But this conversion soon landed him in trouble with the prison authorities. Here's an excerpt from one of Cruz's letters to Fujimoto. Unbelievable as it may sound, while in the Texas prison, officials of the Ellis unit placed me in solitary confinement on bread and water for 2 weeks as punishment for my having lended my Buddhist religious materials to other prisoners who were interested in practicing the religion. Mr. Cruz here doesn't give all the details. So he was put into solitary confinement. This meant that he was separated and thrown into like a special concrete cell, which had no windows and there was no light whatsoever. He was given no clothing, just a thin blanket, and he was kept in there week after week, just being fed portions of bread and water twice per week. So this was like just genuinely inhumane torture. Many prisoners who wrote to you, I'm going back to his words, were consequently persecuted and their letters to you were suppressed. Some of my materials from the church were confiscated, as the Buddhist church means. Unfortunately, I was unable to retrieve my book on awareness of self. Many of us on Ellis had hoped to organize a group to study Buddhism and purchase literature from the church, but prison officials would not permit us to congregate as the Catholics, Jewish, and Protestants are permitted. But we were not discouraged, much to the contrary. The official resistance to our religious devotion always seemed to unite us more firmly, and we became more determined to show ourselves worthy of the faith for which we were more than willing to endure humiliation, persecution, and severe punishments. I am confident that in this conflict, religious liberty will prevail, for no government can externally control the internal workings of individual conscience. Cruz indeed was not daunted. As he wrote to Fujimoto, the support that he had received from Fujimoto and his Buddhist faith enabled him to endure the darkest of times. Quote, "The instruction I had received from you previously enabled me to wait all these months that I have been in complete solitude. It has not always been easy, for you know the 1,000 weaknesses to which the flesh is heir, and being alone, one is often tempted to depart from the true path. Fortunately, Amida's mirror is ever with me, and the thought of you does not long permit the spirit to dwell in hungry realms. You have been a great comfort to me, not only through your counseling, but through the reinforcement of my own spiritual identification and ideals. My environment is not fertile soil for the preservation of the Buddhist lotus. And in times of stress, I find in you a source of strength because what you teach is a reflection of myself." End quote. So furthermore, while he was in solitary, Cruz actually he used his ration of toilet paper and a pen that he had smuggled in order to write out a class action lawsuit against the Texas Department of Corrections. The Texas court system denied him, but he appealed, and in 1972, his suit reached the U.S. Supreme Court. The court ruled that Cruz's constitutional right to freedom of religion had been violated. This monumental decision legalized the teaching and practice of Buddhism within American prisons and is the basis on which all subsequent Buddhist prison ministry has been carried out. So there's a great many more stories of engaged Jodo Shinshu Buddhists from my research that I could tell. Spoiler, they're going to be in these books that I'm writing. But given our time constraints today, I want to stop and reflect on the meaning of these stories for us, living in yet another time of challenges. So going back to my first example, drawing from the example of Shinran in the Taisho, Reverend Munetto formulated the concept of Amida Buddha's 49th vow. In Munetto Sensei's time and place, that vow took the form, "If the Vietnam War does not come to an end, I will not attain enlightenment." Thus, the primal compassion of the Buddha flowed forth amid the tremendous suffering of the fighting in Southeast Asia and in American communities. My argument is certainly not that Amida Buddha ended the war. Rather, the compassion of the Buddha enabled Jodo Shinshu Buddhists like Munetto to stand up for peace and human rights, and they contributed to the end of suffering in Vietnam. Elsewhere, the 49th vow took different forms. In post-war America's oppressive white supremacist society, it took the form, "If Japanese American Buddhists are not able to find self-affirmation and develop ways to live with beauty and power in America, I will not attain enlightenment." Thus, the seeds for compassion for others and respect for Asian culture, which had first been fostered in children of BCA temples, flowed into movements for ethnic identity, cross-racial solidarity, and liberation from second-class citizenship. And again, in the darkness of Texan prison, in solitary confinement, the 49th vow took yet another form. If the Dharma is not enabled to heal and support people within the American prison hell realms, I will not attain enlightenment. The power of that vow nurtured and strengthened a Chicano man who had been treated as a slave by his prison masters, forced to pick cotton and rot in the dark because they considered him less than a full human being. With the force of Amida Buddha's compassion and wisdom pouring into him, he fought the entire U.S. judicial system until he won a decisive victory for the religious rights of Buddhists and others. This concept of the 49th vow of Amida Buddha is the recognition that the work of the Buddha didn't end with the establishment of the Pure Land. The Pure Land is a means, not an end. The end, which Bodhisattva Dharmakara sought, was the extinction of suffering. So long as suffering persists, the Buddha's vows continue to multiply, responding organically to the evolving nature of suffering in our human world. They provide a framework for thinking about how Jodo Shinshu Buddhists can respond to the troubles and oppressions of our own day, and a connection to the great source of power, insight, and compassion that is needed to continue the difficult work of making things better for everyone. So I want to close my formal remarks by pointing out that in a very real way, Dr. Taitetsu Unno is at the root of all of this research. It was Dr. Unno who trained me in Jodo Shinshu, who showed me that there was a place for sincere intellectuals within Pure Land Buddhism, and counseled me to go to graduate school. It was that counsel which led to my career in American Buddhist studies, my research on social engagement, and the honor of being asked to give our talk here this afternoon. So I want to close by expressing my deep gratitude to Dr. Unno, to his wife Alice, and to their son Mark, all of whom have provided mentorship, support, and beautiful examples to me and my family for nearly 30 years. Thank you to each of them, and also thank you to all of you for coming and everyone online for helping us continue the legacy of Dr. Unno's work. Thank you very much.
Like, I can't wait to read all 3 of those books. So when are they going to come out?
As soon as I write them. So I've been making substantial progress. So at this point in my career, so as you heard, I've written 1,000 books. And therefore, I finally decided, okay, I'm sick of getting a contract, having a deadline, having to stressfully work for that deadline, and then turn in whatever I had. This is a big project. This is the biggest project that I've done. And so I've decided that, hey, I got tenure. I'm a full professor. There's nowhere else to go up. I don't need the cred anymore. I'm going to do this on my timeline. I'm going to do it right, not on anybody else's timeline and to their demands. So I'm writing the books first and then doing the book proposal and so on. Now, I have actually been in initial contact with Oxford University Press, and they're interested in receiving the formal proposal. They have an idea about what the project is, and they want to look at it. And I've worked with them in the past. So my hope is to maybe have that first volume ready soon, and probably then out, if I get lucky, maybe early next year. And then part of it, so I went today, I'm on Eastern time, so I got up at like 4 a.m, and then I had all day, and I went up the hill to the Ethnic Studies Library, and I got out the old issues of like Rodan and Super Duper Asian Scooper and all these other like zines, Asian American movement stuff from the late 60s or 70s. I was going through, I was like getting all this more stuff. So I have to go home now and rewrite chapter 6 of the first volume because I got such good stuff, unbelievable stuff. So this is the problem when it's here on timeline and you're an academic, you can just keep writing forever. And in fact, the secret answer is this was only one book. And then I wrote so much that when I couldn't even see 100,000 words in the rearview mirror anymore, I was like, uh-oh. This is multiple books. So, because originally it had all been one thing, but it's just, I've just gone, I've already written, I don't know, probably 300,000 words at this point. So so I'm going to finish up that first volume. And then the next one on LGBTQ plus stuff, that one's virtually done as well. In fact, that was the one that caused it to become things, because that started as one chapter, and then I had too much, and it became 2 chapters, and then I had too much, and now it was 6 chapters. 6 chapters a book. So I was like, okay, that has to be its own book. That means there's other stuff. Anyways, you asked a simple question, but as you know, scholars can't give a simple answer. Here you go. You got a 5-minute monologue. So the too long didn't read version is hopefully volume 1 next year, hopefully volume 2 late that same year or the following year, because they're both really close to done. And hopefully volume 3 the year after that, because the others will be out of the way. And I've written 40% or more of that one too. So coming soon, hopefully to a bookstore near you. We'll see. Yeah. Yeah, Harry's got it.
I think Reverend Dr. Ryo Imamura came up several times.
Yep.
And I was just wondering if you had a chance to interview him and speak with him.
I did.
Okay.
So I did an extensive oral history interview with him in 2021. The last major oral history interview he ever did. He's now deceased. He talked with me about stuff he had never talked on the record about before, including, some of us are aware, the whole kerfuffle that he had with Helen Tworkoff at Tricycle, which basically set off the second generation of research in our subfield on American Buddhism. He talked to me about stuff they had never talked about that is not on the record anywhere. And then I've talked to Helen Tworkoff and everybody else involved. So one portion of the first book goes back over that with new information about what was going on. I didn't have time to tell that story here, but that'll be in there as well. So what was the question?
I think
Did it?
I think now you
Go for me. Okay, excellent. See, again, I did the academic thing again, where I was like, oh, you said keywords that mean something to me. I'll talk about those. Okay. Yep. All right. Well, I'm glad I accidentally satisfied the question. Thank you. Yeah, I did. So it was about oral history. I did like I said, it was a 3+ hour interview with him. And I have also interviewed dozens of other people. I also did the last major oral history interview with Reverend Segen Yamaoka. Talked with him about stuff that has also never been put on the record. So that will eventually be coming out. I've interviewed a bunch of other people.
When was that?
That was in, I want to say 2022. I don't have my interviews in front of, actually I do have them, but I have to go into another screen to find them. But yeah, it's right here. It's on this hard drive right here. And yeah. Oh, don't worry. It's backed up in like 5 places, encrypted. Yeah. I've got major stuff all about, maybe I'll just save it for the book actually. Yeah. But yeah, good stuff. Really good stuff that I easily could have put in here if I had like an hour instead of 45 minutes. Yeah. Other questions?
You've clearly done some really serious archival work, and I was wondering if you wanted to talk. If you wanted to, you could tell us a little bit about your archivalist process.
Sure.
And maybe share some anecdotes of some interesting archival adventures you've had.
Sure. So I have collected into my personal collection well over 6,000 pieces of like Jodo Shinshu, North American and Hawaiian Jodo Shinshu ephemera. So newsletter issues of various temples, minutes from meetings, flyers, pamphlets, many thousands of items I have. Many of which I've digitized, many of which I haven't, but I've read them so much and I've sticky flagged the things I need that I can still use that as well. So that's part of what's able to drive me to be able to do such comprehensive work, because I can search for, if I'm like, okay, I need a chapter on abortion. So I can search for all the relevant search terms across, just many thousands of documents in Jodo Shinshu history. And then also I have the others that aren't digitized, but I've been through them so many times that I put flags on all the stuff I knew. So then I go and I reread them and get the sort of stuff. So my process is predatory. So I go to any Buddhist temple that is dumb enough to let me in the door, and I go into their closets, and I go into their offices, I go into the filing cabinets, and I have a Adobe Acrobat scanning app on my phone, and I scan all of these things into PDFs that are then OCR searchable. So I have this enormous collection that I have been building since the 1990s. And then, so that's why it's become so large, right? Before I even knew I was going to graduate school, I was starting to collect stuff. And then once I got to graduate school, I started to collect stuff. So I have so much stuff in my home that I've collected from everywhere, Hawaii and California especially, but many other places. So actually, I was hoping to go to the Buddhist Church of Oakland tomorrow, if there are people there, because that is a site where I haven't gone and, hungrily devoured all of their resources. So I would, if they, whereas I've already done this to the Berkeley Temple when you had me here as a speaker a couple of years ago. I scanned, the Padma from like 1990 onwards, right? So I would love to do that for the Oakland Temple. If I had enough time, maybe, there's a bunch around here that I would like to do. But I've been collecting all this. In some cases, I have entire print runs of many of the major all the Wheels of Dharma, all of the American Buddhists, all of Berkeley Busse, of course, all of many other sorts of things, and then lots of all of the local newsletters and all this sort of stuff. So this is what I do. I go around, I collect the stuff, I ask permission, and then I go and take what I can. And I've just been at it so long and so neglectful of my family that I have a huge library at this point. Yeah.
A public ask to Reverend Bridge. Will he become enough?
Where were you 20 years ago before they just started throwing stuff out?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, so often this happens. Oh yeah, I have stuff that's been subsequently thrown out, and I'm sure that I have literally the last remaining copy of so many things, right? So all of this, that means that there's a big responsibility with this. It's not just about producing the research, but ultimately all of this is going to have to go somewhere in an enduring way, so that we can actually call back some of that history that's been maybe temporarily lost. Hopefully it can be resurrected through some of those things. That's the other reason I do it anyway. I'm married to an academic librarian, so I'm just very conscious about going and collecting stuff and trying to organize it. And because people, especially in Hawaii, things, stuff rots. It's tropical, right? And how many BCA temples and Canadian temples have burned down accidentally or otherwise through the years, right? So we keep losing stuff. So that's why I'm just desperately always collecting this stuff, because it's not just my projects; it's all the other projects that the future could ever do. We have to preserve this stuff. So that's kind of the underlying actual thing that's going on here. Yeah.
So we know what Reverend Bridge is doing tomorrow, but we have some questions online.
Oh yeah, that's great. Yeah, since if you could read those, I don't see them.
Maya Togashi asks, by chance, did you ever speak with Reverend Yoshiaki Fujitani, retired bishop from Hawaii, at all before he passed away in 2020?
So yeah, I did speak with him. I lived in Hawaii in 2017, 2018. I was on sabbatical. I took the family and I moved to Honolulu and I was the Numata visiting professor in Buddhist studies at the University of Hawaii in Manoa. And during that time, I was doing extensive research of this type and going around collecting stuff. And I did speak with him. I gave the Yoshiaki Fujitani lecture at the Chaminade University in 2018 during that trip. That lecture was part of the genesis of my most recent book, Living in Butsu, about Shinran's teachings and social engagement. That's a Dharma book, not a research book, but that was part of it's always research informed though, right? So I talked with him, but I didn't do an extensive oral history interview with him at that time. He was very aged, and while I spoke with him, collegially, he just wasn't really available to me to do a full kind of like oral history interview. So that in some ways may be a missed opportunity, but because of that connection, I started paying way more attention to him And so therefore I started finding others who had done oral history with him. And I also started collecting obscure sources about stuff. So he's actually a major player in the second book because he was a very significant state figure in the state push to legalize same-sex marriage in Hawaii. And Hawaii is where it all started in the United States, because in 1990, there was an attempt to legalize stuff in Hawaii. Then that got litigated. And then as that was coming to a head in the mid-1990s, that's when they put in the Defense of Marriage Act in response to the Hawaiian developments. And then, and so on and so forth. Eventually, Massachusetts got there ahead of Hawaii, but Hawaii was really working on this. They didn't get full legal equality, but what they did get, like marriage equality, but they got domestic partner benefits for same-sex couples. They were the first or among the very first because of their work, and that was what they worked out as their sort of compromise. So what happened then was Reverend Fujitani, and hopefully they can hear me online, he was one of the major figures in the push to legalize things. He co-created a religious group for marriage equality in Hawaii. This was after he had retired from the bishop position. So in his retirement, he created this group. He went and testified multiple times to the legislature. He picketed when there were opposing sort of things going on and everything. So he was really important as a person in doing that sort of stuff. So I'll be telling that story among others in that second book. So he will get strong attention. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
And of course he was in that picture. Should I put that picture up? That's probably everybody's favorite picture, I bet, right? Let me go back. There we go. Right. So here he is. Yeah. Anyways, there may be other questions.
Yeah, there was a comment from Samyukta who says, I'm a volunteer chaplain at a jail for my field education site. To hear about the presence of Reverend Fujimoto having prisons and jails is thrilling. Do you have more artifacts or stories you can share about the resources and care he gave to the inmates?
Yes, absolutely. So there's several different sources that one could find. First of all, there's a book that Reverend Fujimoto published called Out of the Mud Grows the Lotus. Oh, I think that's the exact title. If not, it's very, very close to that. And so that was a book that he published about his work with prisoners in various American prisons. So the quotes that I gave today came from out of that, and there's a lot more material in there. In fact, this is actually one of the earliest and also still one of the best resources that we have on American Buddhist prison ministry and the experience of prisoners and this sort of thing. So that's a book which I bet they still have copies for sale at the Buddhist Studies BCA bookstore. We still have the BCA bookstore, don't we? Okay. Okay, it's online now? Okay, yeah, because I noticed that there was something else going on downstairs nowadays. Okay, all right, very good. But you can probably still find copies of that. If not, you'll be able to enter library loan or something. So that's a really good resource to look at. And then another source is here locally in Berkeley, Diane Ames, a local member. She, back in the 90s, was a major figure with the Buddhist Peace Fellowship. She was their most consistent writer for Turning Wheel, which is what the Buddhist Peace Fellowship newsletter evolved into. So she ran the longest running column, and she was the most prolific author in Turning Wheel. And as part of that work, she did research on his prison ministry stuff. And she published in both Turning Wheel and in the Wheel of Dharma about that work to publicize some of it for a newer generation. You know, people in the BCA in the 60s and 70s 100% knew he was doing this stuff. But he passed away in 1982. So by the 90s, turnover, people don't know anymore that he had done this stuff, that he working with Fred Cruz, that they had literally established the basis for religious freedom in American prisons. That stuff just gets lost over time, right? So she did work to bring that back into the attention. then other people forget about subsequently, but there's always me out there voraciously consuming everything. So I'm trying to bring this back, and I figure if I publicize in these ways, maybe these stories kind of go on the permanent record in that way. So those are some places to go and look to our person who asked the question. There's probably some others too, if I think about it. When the book comes out, that'll be in the third book. But I've already written some of that material, and there'll be further breadcrumbs that can be followed at that time. Yes, yeah, Lucy.
Yeah, thank you. So inspiring. And I'm wondering if we were going to get the YouTube teaser trailer for, say, the top 3 Asian American all power to the Sangha women in the history of socially engaged Buddhism for the Jodo Shinshin. What would be those 1, 2, and 3 top 3 women that you would want to?
Excellent. Okay, so I anticipated this question. It's almost as if I planted you as a ringer, which I did not. But this was the thing. So the original conception of this talk had 6 different figures, and it was the further people. That was all the women's stories. Then when I discovered that I didn't have an hour, that I had 45 minutes, I then decided to make some cuts. And very unfortunately, when I went through the process of what is going to be most coherent as a single talk, debuting this stuff, the best stories that were going to work together with each other all happened to be male ones. And so the female stories that were on the list got lost, unfortunately. But they are majorly featured in the volumes that I have. Lots of, I've very intentionally surfaced women's participate whenever possible in that. So ones that I would say, okay, so the 3 that I would say would be, okay, suddenly when you talk, your mind goes blank. There's Shimaji, what's her last name? Oh my gosh. Okay, I'm gonna call her Shim because that's her first name. And suddenly her last name has just evaporated from my mind. This happens sometimes when you reach a certain age and you've been already talking for an hour. So, Kanazawa? She was a woman in Hawaii, and during the in the 1940s, of course, we had the attack on Pearl Harbor, and then all of the temples were shut down, with just one exception. The ministers and many other community leaders were incarcerated. And many of them were eventually moved to the mainland, away from Hawaii. And there's lots of repression of the Japanese American community in Hawaii. Among the things, there was a curfew. All Japanese Americans had to be home off the streets by a certain time every evening. And they had no further freedom of movement between or off of the islands. So we often think about how things were worse in the mainland, and they were. But things were quite bad, actually, in Hawaii as well. They were living under conditions that we would never tolerate, except that over here things were even worse. So therefore, that tends to get the lion's share of our attention, right? So there was one exception to this. This woman, Shim, was the only Nikkei person who had permission from the American military authorities to move about the islands. This is because she managed to finagle a position where she was the attaché to the ambassador of, I want to say it's Sweden. Again, I don't have my notes right in front of me, and it's been I wrote her story up in 2021 because it was so important. So now it's actually been years since it's deteriorated, but it's right. It's literally right here. And they were neutral because they were neutral in the war. And my apologies to Sweden if I'm wrong that it wasn't Sweden, it was some other European country. I really apologize. I work in Asian history. I've almost never been to Europe. I just sometimes get things messed up. It will not be wrong when I publish, of course, right? But here on the spot, I may be forgetting. So because she was officially working under the, let's say, Swedish embassy, she therefore was recognized as a neutral agent, and they were able to convince the American military to allow her to move around. So because of this, she was the only person who was able, in literally the entire Nikkei community, who could retain a position of authority and relative power within the islands, and also the only person with permission to disobey the curfew and to move about the islands. So because of this, first of all, okay, so all these leaders were taken away. They were all men. And what happened, so all these Buddhist ministers and also Shinto ministers and so on, and Japanese language teachers, most of whom were part of the Honganji tradition, they were all taken away, just boom, they're gone. And now their wives and their children have no support. So these people would come to her and try to seek, she would try to arrange jobs for them or support from the community. And actually one of the primary things she did was they would come to her and she would let them tell their stories and cry to her. And she would cry with them. And together they would have a solidarity that helped them. They could not change their circumstances, but they could change how they were within the circumstances together by being together. And as part of this also, she flew about the islands, the only person allowed to do this, because life moves on, people still kept dying. And so there would need to be funerals. But all of the Buddhist ministers are in prison. So she would go, whenever somebody died, she would go and she would conduct a Buddhist service. She was from the Nishi Honganji tradition. She would go and conduct a Buddhist service for them, even though she did not have Tokudo. She's the only person. When you have to, you step into the gap. She wasn't the only person who was doing this. She was the one who could fly around and do this. On the Big Island, so Bomori, the wives of priests, famously, there's a famous Bomori woman. Her father, her husband, because it was incarcerated, but she would go around on the Big Island and conduct services in this place. Reverend Ernest Hunt, who I mentioned, he was incarcerated. He was white, so he would go around. He had a portable butsudan in a box that he had straps. He would put it on his back, and he would go to the places where there needed funerals. Also, he was doing this as well. So Jim, I'm forgetting the name of this woman, even though I've taught her autobiography so many times, and Reverend Hunt. They were three figures who were doing all this. So she was very important at that time. And then again, because she had this ability, eventually they wanted to reunite the families of the incarcerated ministers with the husbands and fathers who had, in the meanwhile, been taken to Crystal City, Texas, and put in the internment camp there. So she, as the only person who could move about, she then organized everything, and she shepherded them to the mainland and on a long train ride all the way to Texas, where they could enter incarceration with and therefore be reunited. So she was labeled the Florence Nightingale of Hawaii. She was a very prominent person at this time. So she did all that. This is just the first part of her story. She goes on to have an important further career, and then she, in a second Honganji member, Rose Nakagawa, am I getting that right? Nakamura. Oh my God, this happens when you're up here and you're forgetting that you've talked to so many people. So Shima and Rose were both members of the Moilili Honganji. The Moilili is a traditionally Japanese-American neighborhood, kind of at the foot of the hills where UH is. So they, in the 1990s, early 1990s, I'm forgetting the exact year, they put together one of the biggest social service organizations in Hawaii called Project Dana. And so what they did was they together created this Project Dana at the Moilili Honganji mission, which is designed to help aging elders and other people who are maybe because of disability or whatever, have limited mobility, need extra care, and so on, to help them with their situation. So it's basically kind of like elder care stuff. But there's a volunteer run, there's not for profit, this sort of thing. And so they train people how to do stuff, and they organize volunteers to go on grocery runs or to take people out, to the library, to do all this sort of stuff. They hold regular activities for the people to come together and everything. And very importantly, part of this is they not only organize huge amounts of elder care but they also organize things to take care of the supporters as well. So the family members and other loved ones who are taking care of these aging people in the community, they also are receiving services from Project Dana. They are given socials and activities and presence and this sort of thing, because they recognize from a Buddhist point of view that it's not just these people, aging and suffering in isolation, that the caregivers themselves are interdependently part of this, and they burn out, they need support and so on. So there's a very overt part of the Project Dana approach to all this sort of thing. This is one of the largest social service organizations in Hawaii. Specifically, they've got way over 1,000 volunteers. They have all these people that are involved, not just Buddhists these days. It remains Buddhist-based, but they take people from all over because people from all over need help. And Project Danas have then been exported throughout Jodo Shinshu temples in North America. We have one at my temple in Toronto. And there's many in many other places as well. So there's two folks right there. And then a third person who was in the talk but didn't make the cut is Karen Akahoshi. Am I getting this right?
Yes.
His name?
Yes.
Right? Okay. So it starts with, and she actually did various activist stuff back in the day, but I pick up her story because Reverend Donald Castro, longtime BCA minister, he had from early on, he had this very environmental consciousness, and he was doing a lot of writing in the Wheel of Dharma in the 80s and other places on ecology and Buddhism. A lot of work. And eventually this became something that he called, what does he call it? Eco Sangha. That's it. Sorry. There's also one in Hawaii with a different name, so I had to make sure I was pulling up the right mental files. So his work evolved into this idea of Eco Sangha, which is based on Buddhist ideas of interdependence and so on, then sort of greening your temple practices. It's like using each temple to make them green and also make them sort of incubators of eco-consciousness for their communities, for the neighborhood, this sort of thing, right? So he had this idea, he was philosophically teaching all this, but it was Karen at the San Jose temple who put together the first actual physical eco-sangha at that temple. And gathered other volunteers, and they create. So now Eco Sangha wasn't like Reverend Castro, typing out his ideas and published in the Wheel of Dharma. Eco Sangha became a real world thing where they formed a committee, and they met regularly, and they audited the temple's practices, and they made suggestions, and this developed in so many ways based on her leadership. They developed. They hold an Earth Day service every year. And followed by an Earth Day, what would you call it? Like a bazaar, essentially, right? Where they have all these activities. They get the Dharma school kids to do build all these, make different different stations about all sorts of stuff, everything, worm composting and, use your old stuff, transform it into this, just you name it, anything related to eco-friendly stuff, right? But this has been going on for years. And they successfully transformed many practices there. And then, of course, other eco-sanghas, just like Project Dana has traveled. And so BCA temples and Canadian Jodo Shinshu temples and Hawaiian temples become sort of incubators, and then they can send it on to each other. So it travels all around. These eco-sanghas now exist at various temples in North America. In Hawaii, inspired by all this, they created the Green Honganji project. And so they're doing their own things. They did a big audit of a bunch of their temples and all this sort of stuff. So Karen is a third very important person who also receives significant attention. That's in the third book. Yeah. So there's that would be my top three, but the list is much longer than those. Yeah.
Thank you, Jeff. I'd like to ask Mark.
So I just want to, first of all, thank on behalf of the Unno family, my mother Alice, my wife Megumi, but also my father Taitetsu Unno, who I think is present. I very palpably feel his presence in this room through Jeff, through all of you. And so on behalf of our family, I'm very, very deeply grateful for this moment and the continuation of the Taitetsu Unno Memorial Lecture. And a special thanks to President Scott Mitchell and all of you for making this event possible. And I'm very, very grateful to Jeff for his wonderful presentation. And you know, the first thought that came to my mind as he was speaking is that this is real research and this is real scholarship. And real research and real scholarship takes a lot of hard work, and the tremendous amount of archival research, of thoughtful reflection, all the writing he's done, the 1,000 books he's written. But most importantly, real scholarship serves human beings rather than being merely a parade of expert knowledge, which often ends up being the case in academic study, and especially my field of Buddhist studies. And so, you know, I think it just makes it worth all of the work that goes into putting on an event like this, to hear somebody who shares the kind of human stories and Dharma stories that inspire us as an audience, and tells the story of Jodo Shinshu and Shin Buddhism in its history, in its past, present, and can inspire the future. And so as part of that, I just want to share a few thoughts that go with my reflections in that regard. For me, it was a great learning opportunity to hear the stories of so many figures and people that not only I had heard about, but knew in person, like Reverend Ryo Imamura, the whole Imamura family, Ron Miyamura, and all these others, a lot of whose engagement with social, political, environmental issues I don't really know that much about. So, for example, Ryo Imamura, the thing that I remember most about Ryo Imamura is he was so good at playing blackjack,
Yes,
that he was outlawed from all the casinos in Nevada. Right.
I have that also on tape. In all the states too.
So I knew about some of his social activism, but much more about his card playing prowess. As part of the sort of the storytelling power of what Jeff is doing, which is really reflected in all of his scholarship and all of the Buddhist work that he does, as well as the work of other key figures like Scott Mitchell and represented by his book, but which really permeates all of his work in the making of American Buddhism, reflects a special moment, the present moment, in the development of Buddhism in the West, in North America, and the world. And that's because we went through a very complex history, initially being first, second generation immigrant, ethnic Japanese American Buddhist temples and churches, communities. Then the initial wave of interest by non-Japanese Americans, but going through difficult periods of conflict between the traditional communities and those who were newly interested. And now finally represented by the work of people like Jeff Wilson, Scott Mitchell, the Institute of Buddhist Studies, and so many activities that are going on here at the Jodo Shinshu Center, really are coming together. And a combination of profound understanding and reflection on the traditions of Jodo Shinshu, but also the incredibly powerful and invaluable contributions that come from the North American context of engaged Buddhism, that draws on profound reverence for the depth of tradition and the infusion of the new energy that comes from the contemporary moment. And I thought this was wonderful in the way that he began with the story of Reverend Muneto, who I personally know very well, and this idea of the 49th vow, And that's a very powerful way to present it, because Buddhism is not a closed system. It's intrinsically not a closed system. As central teachings of emptiness, of dharmic spontaneity, of oneness and boundless compassion already are expressions of the unbounded character of the Dharma and the depth of compassion, which is bottomless. And that religious traditions, if they only are rooted in tradition, die on the vines. That innovation and renewal is a constant in the lifeblood of all religious traditions, including Shin Buddhism. I really appreciated the stories that he shared about key figures in the development of Shin Buddhism in the West and North America, sharing the hardships that many of these key figures underwent. And many of them paid very, very heavy price, like Ryo Imamura, who was very outspoken about the mainstream media treatment of Buddhism represented by Tricycle and the editorship of Helen Torkov, where not only Jodo Shinshu, Shin Buddhism, but the contributions of all Japanese Americans completely sidelined in favor of white Buddhist contributions. And basically he was blacklisted for that. He could never publish in any of the mainstream Buddhist journals like Tricycle, Lion's Roar, and he had difficulty even obtaining an academic position, which eventually succeeded as a great teacher and scholar at Evergreen State University, and yet he was not included among the prominent researchers, even though he should have. And so all these stories are wonderfully wonderful to receive, so much learning that I did in just this brief time. I can't wait to read the books as they come out. And many of these stories really share the power of Shin Buddhism as a lay-based movement, drawing not only because so many of these issues, social issues, political issues, and environmental issues, are things that touch the lives of ordinary, everyday lay people, but really draw their strength from the suffering and the compassion shared among laity, which is different from the monastic class. And so really features the power of great compassion that's expressed in Shin Buddhism. Just as a final brief note, just to mention a few other women who have contributed greatly to engage Buddhism in North America. One of the first names that comes to mind is Hoshina Seki, who became director of propagation for the Buddhist Churches of America, and who came out very, very late in her life into the full bloom of who she is in her 70s, which has represented her greatest period of activism and all that she's contributed to the understanding of LGBTQ+, of transgender, of non-binary. So she's been a great contributor. A figure that Scott has written a great deal about in his book, The Making of American Buddhism, Jane Imamura, who was foundational to first the founding of the Buddhist Study Center, which is a precursor to the Institute of Buddhist Studies. And without his book, we wouldn't know, the larger public wouldn't know at all that without that center, we might not have Gary Snyder, the beat poets, and so many key figures who've been celebrated in the mainstream, but her and her husband and Ryo's work have been almost entirely overlooked until we had The Making of American Buddhism. So it's just so gratifying to me and such a great learning opportunity to me to have all the tremendous amount of work that goes into putting this annual lectureship in place. And as I said at the very beginning, I just want to express my family's profound appreciation to Jeff, to Scott, to Reverend Miyagi, who carries on his own family's tradition in the greatest possible way, and to the staff and everybody here at the IBS and the JSC who make this possible. Thank you very much.